leaders make use of humility and integrity to lead their teams. Humility and integrity can lead to trust. In this lesson, we are going to teach you the skills and the knowledge to use these important leadership tools. Then, a bit about me. My name is Bianca and I have 7 years of management experience. I have my degree in BCom Business Management, my honors in Education Management, and finally, I am currently completing my MBA. My primary focus is to give managers and leaders the tools to develop themselves and their teams. I am looking forward to guiding you through these lessons. With that, let's jump into today's lesson. In today's lesson, we are going to explore the importance of leadership in the workplace. So let's review today's objectives. Firstly, why leadership makes a difference. Then, the dimensions of leadership. Finally, lead with resolve and humility. Let's start with topic number 1. Why does leadership make a difference? Well, let's look at a question to kick off our topic. What percentage of businesses say it's important to develop leaders at all levels? Please type in your answer. Then, moving on to our first topic. In order to understand the importance of leadership, we need to look at the leadership framework. But what does the leadership framework actually mean? The leadership framework is a set of principles defining what leaders must know and must do. The framework clearly defines the requirements for leaders and sets a practical and consistent standard expected of the leaders. A good rule of thumb to keep in mind is thinking of leadership in the following ways. It addresses leadership in a holistic manner at the individual, team, and organizational level. Let's have a look at an example. Here we see a framework for a service-based company. We have 2 main categories. 1, creating the vision, and 2, delivering this strategy. So let's look at 1, creating the vision. We see the leader needs to set the direction and the goals. We also see the leader has to come up with the vision to improve the service that the company offers. Then number 2, delivering the service. The leader has to lead the organization and also focus on working with others. The leader also has to come up with how can they best deliver the service. Lastly, we see that for both the vision and the delivery strategy, demonstrating personal qualities is important. They need to set the behavioral competencies and qualities that we need for the service and the vision. Then moving on, let's have a look at more of a general framework. Level 1, we see the values we want our leaders to display at every level. For example, we want our leaders to display empathy or be passionate. Level 2, we see the personal qualities we want our leaders to display. This comes back to the behavioral competencies. For example, we want our leaders to have a strong level of emotional intelligence. Then level 3, we see 3 categories: empowered working, nurturing relationships, and outwork focus. When we look at empowered working, we see they need the leaders to make tough decisions and be brave when communicating. When we look at nurturing relationships, we want our leaders to be collaborative and develop others. Lastly, when we look at outward focus, we can see our leaders need to think holistically, meaning they need to think of the entire company and not just their departments. They need to lead change and transformation. Now that we have looked at 2 leadership framework examples, let's look at the benefits of these frameworks. Number 1, efficient and effective strategy execution. We are able to set our visions and our strategies. Number 2, clarity of actions at all levels. We can think back to our example and we saw that the framework outlined the values, behaviors, and strategies that we need to apply as a leader. Then number 3, a common language and leadership practice across the organization. Having the same language and terms used across the company benefits all employees. It means we consider the same terms, we have the same actions and strategies. It allows employees and leaders to reach the same goals and visions. Lastly, we have consistency that creates a high trust environment. When all leaders use the same terms, actions, and display the same behaviors, it leads to consistency. Employees feel safe and secure in the presence of consistency. This leads to a more stable company, happier employees, and stronger leaders. So how can we create this framework? Well, this is a practical exercise that we can now review. Either you can use this page to review your current leadership framework at your company, or use this to create your own framework. So what is step 1? We have to identify the levels of leadership. In this example, we can see first level, mid-level, and executive leadership. Step number 2, we will identify the areas of focus. For example, you can see each level has a different focus. For the first level leadership, the focus is getting the work done through working with the people. But for the top level of leadership, the executive level, we see the focus being on the system and the processes to sustain the performance of the company. Then number 3, we will identify both the skills and the character traits that the leaders need to display at the different levels. The skills for level 1 leadership will be survival skills. Mid-level would be growth, and the top level would be strategic skills. The reason the skills are different is because the function of the leadership is different. Then, lastly, we look at the character of each level. We want the new leaders to create credibility. On the other hand, we want our top leaders to create a culture-centered leadership. This is a great example of creating a leadership framework that works for your current role, or if you want to create your own. Then, did you know only 22% of employees strongly agree their leaders have a clear direction for their organization? This is why the framework is so important. It gives us a clear direction of what each level of leadership should accomplish and what the vision should be. Then, what is the importance of leadership? Let's look at number 1, empowerment. Employees want to feel empowered and supported by their leaders. When leaders empower employees, we see that the employees are more likely to put in more effort, take ownership of their roles, and add in innovation. Number 2, inspire people. As we stated in lesson 1, employees want to be inspired when working for a leader. This leads to more cohesive teams. Number 3, shared vision. Employees want to share in the vision of the company. This is up to the leader to create and implement an effective company vision. Lastly, lead change. Great leaders can create innovation, change, and this will all benefit the company. So how can we empower, inspire, create a vision, and lead change? Well, we can use 2 ways. We can use a strategic or an operations approach. For strategic, we have the following functions. Define the overall vision and mission of an organization. Develop strategies, systems, and structures to achieve the vision and the mission. Lastly, create both technical and social systems, whereas an operations leadership will focus on the following: ensuring that the organization processes are effectively carried out on a day-to-day basis, monitoring performance, and ensuring that employees understand what is to be done and provided with the authority, knowledge, and skills to do so. A great way to think about it is strategic is a long-term plan. Where is the company going? Versus operations is short-term. It's a day-to-day function. Then, as part of effective leadership, we need to stay prepared. So what does this mean? Well, why do leaders need to stay prepared? What happens if a leader does not stay prepared? We have the following options. Overreact when faced with challenges. Employees struggle to follow leaders that are reactive. This means the leader is not able to control his or her emotions. Then number 2, you lose influence over your team. When the leader fails to manage the change, the employees feel lost. They want to protect themselves and they are less likely to listen to the leader. Number 3, you lose followers. Because the employees feel lost and without leadership, they will look towards new leadership or they will work on their own. So you lose your followers plus your effective team. Lastly, we have when you focus more on your own reaction than that of your team's. A leader can focus on themselves and forget to protect their team members. So all of this is a negative impact you will have on your team and your leadership if you do not stay prepared. But then on the other hand, we see a lot of advantages when leaders stay proactive and they stay prepared. The benefits will include the following. So respond appropriately. When we see leaders respond appropriately to change, we see there's less of a resistance towards change. The leaders were proactive and they had strategies in place to deal with the change. Number 2, they are able to support their team. When the leader has a vision and plan in place, they can focus on their team. Then number 3, resistance to change. When the leader is focusing on the team, they can work to manage the conflict, work to reduce the resistance to change, and make the employees feel part of the change. Lastly, minimize conflict. The leader is able to minimize the conflict because there's a plan in place, he or she knows how to manage the change, and they can focus on the people and not only the task at hand. Now, let's look at a few ways that we can stay prepared. Number 1, slow down. This means take the time to self-reflect and assess the possible risk your team is facing. Involve your teams in brainstorming sessions to evaluate the current and the future possible threats. Then, take the time to think strategically. Take the time to come up with a plan based on your possible threats that you have identified. I always say, hope for the best and plan for the worst. Number 3, focus on your response. Your response is essential. As the leader, you need to be able to control your emotions. Emotional intelligence is key to getting through any difficult situation effectively. If you struggle with this, it is a great way to set up a SMART goal to increase your emotional intelligence. Then number 4, always follow up. Leading with assumptions causes huge issues. Always follow up with your team to make sure they understand your instructions. Then, also make sure to track the progress of the plan or the instructions you have set in place. Then, before we jump into our dimensions of leadership, let's have a look at some of the support options Shaw Academy has to offer. Firstly, we have the chat with Morpheus. Please type in any questions that you have and remember to rate your answers. This way, Morpheus can learn and improve. Number 2, summary note. Then lesson quizzes. Please make sure to take your quiz after each lesson and test your knowledge. Lastly, ask your educator. Please feel free to email me at support@shawacademy.com. I will make sure to answer any questions you guys have and guide you to the right direction. Then, moving on, let's look at a little sneak peek. Coming up in Lesson 4, we are going to explore transactional and transformational leadership. This is a great way to explore the different types of leadership and which one you relate more to. Then, jumping back, let's look at our topic number 2, dimensions of leadership. 58% of employees say they trust strangers more than their boss. This is a high and unfortunate statistic. We need employees to trust company leaders. There are a few great ways that we can create trust. So let's jump into these topics. What is honesty versus integrity? Honesty simply means telling the truth, while integrity means doing the right thing, whether it benefits you or not. I think we can be honest without having integrity, but we cannot have integrity without being honest. Let's look at an example. Sarah is the CEO of a company impacted by economical difficulty. She is known for telling the good, the bad, and the ugly. She has informed the employees that cutbacks are coming and that the company needs to focus on revenue generation. So what is the result of her being open and leading with integrity? Well, the results are Sarah has used transparency and integrity to gain the trust and the respect of the employees. The employees now feel looped in. The company shares the same vision to focus on revenue generation to avoid cutbacks. So let's look at a few ways on how we can develop integrity. Number 1, show vulnerability. Company leaders do not always have to be the strongest people in the room. There are times when you can show you are struggling and that you need support. As a leader, you can look to your team to solve these issues. For example, to use a brainstorming session to come up with innovative ideas. Then, number 2, how do others view you? This is a great function to see if your self-image matches that of the perception of others. You can ask feedback from your employees. You can also ask feedback from your manager or your supervisor. This helps guide leaders to improve and set development plans for themselves. Number 3, honesty. It can be tough to be honest in the business industry. A lot of the information we deal with can be confidential, or we are not able to share it at this time. The key is to share the information that we have right now and that can benefit the employees without damaging the company. Like the example with Sarah, she prepared the employees for the changes coming up and she involved them in the change. Lastly, we have self-audit and accountability. This is a great tool for self-reflection. It is important for leaders to take the time and evaluate their own performance. The aim is to keep ourselves accountable and also see where we are lacking. Now that we have identified 4 steps to start developing our integrity, let's look at 4 ways to maintain our integrity. Number 1, commit to integrity and display grit. This is a long-term plan. We need to set up the discipline or grit to follow through with the shift in our behavior. In order to apply change, we need to plan and use grit to get there. Number 2, lead by example. This comes down to consistency. You need to lead your employees with integrity and make this part of your team culture. Number 3, practice non-judgment. This can be very tricky in the beginning. So how can we use this skill? Leaders need to allow for an open door policy. We want our employees to feel comfortable and honest. We can promote employees being honest by creating a judgment-free zone. Their mistakes will never be held against them. Then, number 4, give others the recognition for their work. As part of integrity, we need to recognize and reward others' hard work. It is essential that great leaders do not keep all the glory to themselves, but openly recognize those who contributed to the success of the outcome. So all of these are great ways that we can maintain integrity. Then moving on, let's have a look at the question we asked right at the beginning of the lesson. What percentage of businesses say it's important to develop leaders at all levels? The answer? 83% of companies have identified the importance of leadership development at every level. But the distressing part is only 5% of businesses have implemented leadership development at all levels. Let's move on to how do leaders lead with humility and resolve? Humility. Humble leaders will use their skills, experience, and knowledge to attract and inspire followers, bring people together, and contribute to their community. Such leaders inspire people and align them with their vision. And humility is the core ingredient that every leader should possess to strive for. This is a very, very important tool for us to use. As we said in lesson 1, we associate managers and leaders with people with power. When we have an arrogant manager or leader, it is difficult for us to trust them or relate to the leader or manager. Then, humility explained. Humility means being honest. When a leader can demonstrate honesty and look back at one's actions and behaviors, it will provide a tremendous opportunity for personal development. We want someone to be humble, to want to grow, and to be honest with themselves and the organization. So, what are some of the reasons we want to build humility? Number 1, promote knowledge sharing. Leaders with humility lead their teams with this in mind. Teams are more willing to share ideas because they want to be honest with their leaders and themselves. Number 2, promote collaborations. The teams are more likely to come together as a team when they feel like their leader is humble and a servant leader. The employees are willing to help each other and work towards the same goal because they are following the culture that the leader is setting. Number 3, it promotes trust. We want leaders that we can trust, and when we see our leaders being humble and advocating for us, it means it is leading to long-term trust with our managers or leaders. Then, number 4, appreciative. When leaders show appreciation, we are willing to do more as employees. Employees are less likely to be clock watchers and will be more focused on meeting the objectives when they feel they are being appreciated. Then, humanity. Leaders who are humble tend to be more relatable. Employees want to follow leaders that will focus on their personal needs and also understand them as a person. Employees can look to leaders to create development paths, career paths, and invest in employees. Number 6, better change management. This comes down to how likely the employees are to follow the leader in times of change or crisis. Well, with a humble leadership, the leader is more likely to keep the influence and to keep the followers of their teams. Lastly, what are some key takeaways? We have acts of humility. Number 1, learning from criticism and admitting mistakes. As leaders, we need to be brave and admit when we need help. We need to be humble and show our employees that we are not ashamed to fail. Leaders need to be open that they have adapted a growth mindset, and this is important for the company culture. Number 2, empowering others. Learn and develop from failure. One of the biggest acts of humility is to empower your employees. You give your employees autonomy, you trust them, and you allow them to do their work. Lastly, you empower your employees by giving them the power to make decisions and allowing them to fail or succeed on their own. Number 3, courage and resolve. Taking personal risk for the greater good. As we mentioned in Lesson 1, Microsoft has this as part of their company culture. This is a great example that when we are humble, we take calculated risk for the greater good. We are willing to serve our company and our employees. Then moving on, how can we display the character traits of being a humble leader? Well, number 1, we have leaders know how to manage their own embarrassment. This means shame and embarrassment is difficult for everyone. Leaders will need to develop this skill. Over time, we need to move past our own embarrassment. A good way to think of this is, with experience, we still feel embarrassed, but now we have the tools to manage those feelings. Number 2, top leaders avoid gossiping. It is essential for leaders to avoid partaking in gossiping. When employees see we are gossiping, it can lead to mistrust. Employees can feel unsafe telling the leader about their personal information and confidential details. Very important. Then, number 3, humble leaders will feel secure in who they are. It is important to feel secure in the leader that you have become. It is also important to have self-belief and confidence. Number 4, humble leaders seek feedback. It is important for leaders to seek input from others. Leaders should actively look to create situations that employees can give feedback and input. Now, let's take a look at a case study of a leader that lacks a humble leadership approach. Here we have the example of the former CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals. He is known for drastically raising the price of a life-saving medication to the point where only a few could afford it. He received a lot of public backlash and complaints. Even when he faced the backlash and the consequences of his actions, he failed to apologize. He failed to have a humble approach and admit when he made a mistake. So as you can see, he was noted as being arrogant, egotistical, and someone that lacks honesty and being humble. So it is important for leaders to admit when they've made mistakes, to be humble when apologizing, and always apologize and recognize your failures. Now, let's have a look at some of the pitfalls this leadership approach can have. We have number 1. Your level of humility needs to match the needs of your team. Well, what does that mean? Being a humble leader can increase team engagement, but it depends on the values your team have. When your team values a humble leadership approach, it works very well, but the opposite is also true. It is important to understand your team as a whole and also look at the individual team members. One team member may need the leader to be humble in their one-on-one meetings. Another team member may need the leader to be to the point. So, this is based on the person and the team you are working for. Number 2, underdeveloped humility. It is important to set your long-term goal for yourself and your team. Develop a humble leadership style can benefit your leadership style and your team culture. Do not be discouraged if you struggle at the start. A lot of leaders give up when the style does not work right at the beginning. Number 3, too much humility can be seen as a weakness. If your team does not value a humble leadership approach, this approach can backfire. It is important to pinpoint your values your team have. Once the leader has evaluated the needs of the team, then you can apply the needed characteristics. Finally, let's have a look at a good rule of thumb to see if this is an appropriate leadership style for your team. Let's have a look at what is a power distance. Power distance is the degree to which people consider the unequal distribution of power in a team acceptable and legitimate. The power distance could affect whether members expected a leader to be humble. So let's look at an example of this. When power distance is high, members would expect leaders to take charge and give strong direction. But when the power distance is low, members would expect more humility from their leaders. Here are my top tips. Number 1, firstly evaluate the level of power in your team. Then, also look at the needs of your team members. Finally, use the information to see if you need a humble leadership approach or more of a direct style. Finally, as we end this lesson, I want to remind you guys of some of the amazing features we have on our website. Number 1, your class, your time. So what does this mean? You can change the date and the time of your lessons, or you can restart your course schedule entirely. Lastly, you are not bound to only watch the live lessons. You can watch the recordings anytime that fits your schedule. Then, some of our toolkit features. Get all your module notes, lesson slides, and bonus content. Then you also get your course notes that I built for you guys. Lastly, just something to keep in mind. Students who purchase the toolkits are 5 times more likely to achieve their goals. Then, as we end this lesson, I have a challenge for all of you. Think of the acts of humility you want to apply in your leadership and management style. Use this opportunity to set up SMART goals as your leadership and management knowledge grows. I want to thank all of you for attending Lesson 3, and I will speak to you all soon.